brothers, this is part 2. We are more than victims. In part 1, I talked about the need, brothers, for us to see ourselves as agents. But what I want to do right here, brothers, is to talk about why it's important that we think seriously about agency in a relationship to victimization. And what I want to do also is to affirm the fact that yes, we deal with constraints. And yes, we are victimized at many levels. Yes, we deal with police brutality. Yes, we deal with unemployment and homelessness. Yes, we are pushed out of schools, K through 12, colleges, universities, graduate programs. Yes, we are pushed out of the economic domain. Yes, there are employers who refuse to hire black men. Yes, there are black men who are dragged through the family courts. Child support, alimony, divorce. Yes, there are black men who are victims of domestic violence. Yes, there are black boys and black male youth who are victims of sexual violence. I don't want to minimize the gravity of these things. And I don't want to minimize the fact that in recent years, we've had scholars who have dedicated their professions, their careers, to unpacking the true condition of black men in the United States. We have scholars who look at the numbers, and yes, the numbers. We have data. We have quantifiable material that tells us where we are in terms of education. That tells us the true picture of intimate partner violence in the United States. That gives us an accurate assessment of how things look in terms of the criminal justice system. It's there. The government has the data. The CDC has the data. And we use the data to dispel the myths that say that black men do not suffer anything. To dispel the myths that somehow black men are supermen who have passports of privilege that allow them to do anything, go anywhere, to live a life haphazardly without any consequences, with no punishments. To suggest that somehow or another black men are on the same level as white men, especially powerful, wealthy, ruling class white men. We are dispelling this mythology that is pervasive, that has been perpetuated by so-called scholars in universities and colleges, sociologists, gender studies people, people in literature and English, people in other fields in the humanities, just the social sciences writ at large, perpetuating racist mythology that has its roots in the 19th century. So yes, we have an apparatus that talks about the real situation that we have in the United States. And that data information is necessary. But brothers, there's something that has to happen after you've looked at the material, after you've looked at the numbers, the disparities. after you look at the actual situation of violence in the black community and who is the most vulnerable to homicide, when you look at the numbers, the employment numbers, as to who is left out of the economy, after you've done that, and you look at the gaps in terms of educational development, why there's an uneven situation in the black community where one gender is outperforming another gender in education. While we can barely even talk about a black male middle class. But you have a black female middle class that flourishes, that everybody knows about. After we look at all of the numbers and the data and the material that gives a better picture of where we are and debunks all these lies, all these myths, all these tall tales, all these fabrications, all this media in film by poets and writers. Once we get through all of that, there's a question of what we do. And that's a question of agency. And that's why black male agency is important. Because we can't just rest in the numbers. And the numbers matter. The question is, what do we do? Where do we go? And that demands that we have a philosophy. That demands that we have an ideology. That demands that we have a worldview that is integral to how we move in the world, how we navigate, how we deal with these various terrains. Now that we know what the economic situation looks like, how do we navigate? How do we deal with this new economy? This new tech economy, this new economy that's shaped by automation. How do we engage that? How do we do with the changes now in higher education, where higher education is becoming more expensive and something that only those who have money can afford? How do we deal with that in light of our history of being stigmatized by institutions of higher learning? So we have to think about how we move, how we interact with the business world, with markets, and even in our social lives when we go downtown and hang out, we go to restaurants and bars and we encounter all sorts of racist aggression, maltreatment. What do we do with that consumer sector who is negative towards black men? What do we deal with the human resources, the human resource people who try to keep us out of workplaces? How do we navigate the workplace when we're there? This demands an agential philosophy, brothers. An agential philosophy that demands that we put a high premium on our discipline, a high premium on our imagination, a high value on our ability to be a quarterback, and be able to read defenses, to be able to see these linebackers and see the defensive backs and to see the linemen and to see what we're going to do, what play we're going to execute. That's what I'm talking about. Being on the offensive. And realizing, brothers, that despite the numbers, despite the data, all the statistics and everything, there are still avenues of movement and change. We can still become entrepreneurs. We can still own businesses. We can still become bosses. We can still save, we can still invest, we can still do smart things with our money. We can avoid negative situations with the opposite sex. We can avoid toxicity once we know how to identify toxicity, toxic people, and toxic relationships. We can learn from our past mistakes, what we did wrong, so that we won't do those things again. And also, we can learn from our past successes, what we did right, and how we can build on what we did right. And we can also learn from other brothers. Brothers who are more advanced than us, brothers who have seen more than us, brothers who have demonstrated in the world that it is possible for a black man to navigate this terrain in the face of hostility and racism in a productive manner. And those brothers do exist. We have it at our fingertips, our ability to maximize our resources, internal and otherwise. At the end of the day, we can't allow the picture that has been painted, whether the picture is painted by people who create all sorts of mythologies about us that see us in a demonic way, or the picture that we get from detailed study research that can be very depressing. We can decide how we're going to go forward. This is a question of ethics. This is a question of conduct. This is a question of agency. Brothers, we must dedicate ourselves to being radical human agents in the face of misandry, in the face of racism, in the face of capitalism that is hostile towards us. So when we get this information that dispels all of these myths about us, that gives us an accurate picture of where we stand, and we learn more about what has happened to us right now, in our recent experience and even in our past experience, hell, over the last 40, 50, 60 years, that information should motivate us in a positive way, in direction. It should propel us to think new ideas, create new perspectives that are beneficial for us and our flourishing. And that's what Black Male Agency is all about. BMA.